other steel makers. That's good. Of course because they want to save their businesses. U.S. Steel will now be a very valuable company. Anybody that makes steel is going to be great. Anybody that works in big steel is going to be very happy.
The U.S. economy has a trade surplus with Australia. We export more into Australia than they export back.
I presented Australia's case for an exemption, and we agreed on wording that an exemption was under consideration.
The United States is set to impose a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports, marking a major shift in global trade policy. Announced by President Trump, this move could have serious consequences for Australia's steel and aluminium industry. Speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump confirmed the tariffs would apply to all countries, but did not specify when they would take effect.
Yeah, any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum too.
Australia's steel-making industry was established in 1915 in New South Wales with BHP Newcastle Steelworks. Production peaked in the 1980s and 90s, producing 10 million tonnes a year at its height, but has since declined due to global competition, with domestic production now led by BlueScope and GFC Alliance. While iron ore remains Australia's dominant export, according to the UN's Comtrade database, the US imported $638 million worth of Australian steel and $439 million in aluminium in 2024. For BlueScope, Australia's largest steel manufacturer, the tariffs may provide an unexpected advantage, as the company primarily exports to the US and employs 4,000 people there, having recently expanded its North Star steel mill in Ohio. BlueScope is also considering further US investment, with plans to introduce carbon steel roofing by building a $1.9 billion plant near its Ohio facility. However, the tariffs impose a serious challenge for manufacturing without US presence. BizAlloy Steel, which operates in Australia and China, saw its shares fall, while South32, a major aluminium producer, also dropped. Aluminium will also be affected by the tariff. Australia exports about 10% of its 1.5 million tonnes a year of aluminium to the US. It's estimated the industry directly employs more than 21,000 people and indirectly supports a further 55,000 families, predominantly in regional Australia. There is also a concern that tariffs may put downward pressure on global steel prices, as producers look to offload excess supply in other markets. This could mean more imported steel flooding into Australia, squeezing local manufacturers' margins. The tariffs pose a key diplomatic test for the Albanese government and Trade Minister Don Farrell. With an election looming, this will be seen as a test for the Albanese-Trump relationship.
Australian steel and aluminium are core input to US supply chains and US-based industry. Australian companies have significant investments in US steel industry, creating thousands of jobs in both the US and in Australia.
The Australian Prime Minister has said that you are considering an exemption for Australia on steel. Is that correct? And why?
I just spoke to him, very fine man, and he has a surplus. I mean, we have a surplus with Australia, one of the few. And the reason is they buy a lot of airplanes. They are rather far away and they need lots of airplanes. And we actually have a surplus. It's one of the only countries which we do. And I told him that that's something that we will give great consideration to.
During Trump's first administration, Australia successfully secured an exemption from similar tariffs on steel and aluminium. That exemption was the result of heavy lobbying by the then Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Ambassador Joe Hockey, who at the time highlighted the amount of trade that came from the US to Australia.
Whatever complaints the United States may have about other trading relationships, it has no complaints with respect to Australia. America has a trade surplus with Australia, a large one in fact.
Critical point for Australia is that these tariffs are unlikely to affect the nation's export of iron ore, a key ingredient in steel production. China imports 85% of the 900,000 kilotons of ore Australia exports, but less than 1% of China's direct steel exports go to the US. The US steel and aluminium tariffs present a mixed outcome for Australia's steel industry. Although Australia's steelmaking industry has declined from its peak, it remains a key sector, particularly in exports. The Australian government now faces a critical diplomatic challenge in securing an exemption as it did during Trump's first administration. Without one, local manufacturers may struggle against falling steel prices and increased competition, reshaping the industry's future and testing Australia's trade relationship with the US.